Order, order. The Prime Minister. The question is that this sitting is now adjourned. Karen Book.
Thank you very much, Mr Rawdon. And can I say I'm delighted to have had the chance to secure this important debate so soon after the publication of the Legal Aid Green Paper. And I think it's a mark of how significant these issues are to Members of Parliament that we have a good attendance in the gallery, as well as a number of MPs here hoping to make a contribution. Members of Parliament, I think, have a very particular interest in legal aid, and legal aid set in the broader context of advice services, because we are ourselves part of the family of advice givers. And that was brought home to me very strongly, kind of my first week as a Member of Parliament, when in my very first surgery a gentleman sat down in front of me and asked if I could offer him assistance with having his wife deported. That was not one of the cases that I was able to refer to a partner legal aid firm, but over the course of 13 years I have made extensive use, and I'm enormously grateful to those organisations, private firms and law centres and other advice agencies in my constituency and thereabouts. And I would actually pay a very particular tribute to them briefly by name. Paddington Law Centre, which is an excellent local facility that has assisted thousands of people in a community. Although the London Borough of Westminster is often seen as a byword for prosperity and all of the great institutions of central London, it does in fact include a number of the most deprived wards in the country. Westminster Citizens Advice Bureau, another superb organisation. I had the pleasure to attend their annual meeting a couple of weeks ago. The North Kensington Law Centre, the Migrants Resource Centre, the Mary Ward Centre, not in the constituency but a very important local organisation, Just for Kids Law, that I'm going to refer to again in a minute, and many private practices as well, the Central London Law Centre, the Brent Private Tenants Association just over the border, but providing a particularly important service to tenants. And these are people who, for the most part, the professionals in the sector are providing a service to many of the most vulnerable and distressed people in society, and doing so for a level of remuneration that is very, very challenging in a professional context. We hear, and sometimes rightly hear, about the eye-watering sums of money that are paid through legal aid in some, particularly some, criminal cases. And I understand that this causes public concern, but as in so many other areas of public policy at the moment, I have to say, Mrs Reardon, we are driven by policy making by anecdote. There are extreme examples, there are issues that we need to address, but overwhelmingly legal aid practitioners are not well remunerated and do an excellent job at astoundingly good value to the public purse.
David Lammy.
Would she agree with me that it's not just that they're not well remunerated, they're in fact not as well remunerated as many of the senior police officers in our constituency and many of the senior teachers, with the average income between £28,000 and £40,000 in London?
I think my honourable friend makes an extremely good point, and of course it's absolutely true that legal aid practitioners who are taking on institutions in the public sector and sometimes in the private sector are significantly less well paid than the professionals who are making public policy decisions that they are challenging. It's certainly true, Mr Rawdon, I think it's important to just put on the record that the last Labour government took decisions, not all of which I think everyone around the table would have always agreed with and may have challenged. It was a healthy debate, but nonetheless took decisions that did bear down on legal aid expenditure. And it is also true, and I think has to be accepted, that had a Labour government been re-elected, there would have been cuts in the legal aid budget. But it is absolutely not the case that the way in which policy was unfolding within the Labour Party would have placed the pressure that we are now seeing emerging, particularly on civil, family and social welfare law, which are the areas of concern that I particularly want to address. it is, of course, absolutely critical that criminal legal aid has to be protected. If criminal legal aid is not available at the right level and with professionals, quality professionals providing that assistance, then justice is denied. It is very, very important indeed that we protect a proper criminal legal aid budget. But there were areas, and I think these were areas where there was some consensus, where Lord Buck, our previous Minister for Legal Aid, who I pay a tribute to, was looking at ways in which we could, without sacrificing the principles of access to justice, bear down, particularly on exceptional costs in the criminal legal aid budget. But my concerns today are around the manner in which the Legal Aid Green Paper has chosen to attack, and it is an attack, the legal aid budget, which bears down, as we know, particularly severely on civil cases, including family and social welfare, taking a number of areas out of scope entirely, including children and family cases where domestic violence is not a stated factor, education, immigration where a person is not detained, clinical negligence, welfare benefits, employment, debt, and some areas of housing. The consequence of this, Mr. Rawdon, is that more than 500,000 fewer people each year are likely to receive help, which will have an effect not only on those people unable to access legal aid services, but it will destabilise and possibly destroy legal aid advice services in many areas and make it extremely hard for the public services to be held to account where they are at fault.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. She's making her case immensely powerfully, and these cuts are atrociously harsh on those civil cases. Nottingham Law Centre in my constituency say that last year they helped 1,300 people avoid repossession, housing repossession, and I'm exceptionally worried about the impact, as she's said, on homelessness and potential people, being put out of their homes. This is immensely important stuff.
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this point, and I'm going to come back in a moment to the issue of housing and homelessness. But, Mr. Rawdon, funding for judicial review is retained within the Legal Aid Green Paper, but in many cases not based upon the legal help that provides the range of cases that allow effective judicial review to be utilised. It's been described to me as being that retaining JR but withdrawing so much legal help as being about as useful as a flight of stairs between the first and second floor of a building when there is none between the ground floor and the first. Judicial review emerges from a wider pool of cases, and there will be inadequate tests of the law if this legal help is withdrawn. We also know from the Green Paper that eligibility for legal aid is being reduced further. Over recent years, this has already been a trend. The proportion of the population eligible on a sliding scale of contributions has fallen from around half of the population to around a third. But the Green Paper lowers the level still further at which people are asked to contribute from their assets and increases the percentage level of contributions from earnings. And for the first time, those on social security benefits, should it is suggested, be subjected to a full asset test. I would like the Minister, possibly today, but certainly if not today, if he could write to me. It would be good to know if the Department has made any calculation of the costs of conducting such an exercise. All of these measures taken together beg the question that whether even those potentially entitled to legal aid can afford to take up that entitlement and what that means for access to justice. Of course, members of the public are being asked to insure themselves to cover future legal aid battles instead. But as those who are losing out are already overwhelmingly low-income households, for whom finding money for a hypothetical eventuality, as against the daily struggle to house, heat and feed themselves, this seems extremely unlikely. There is, of course, nothing wrong with taking out insurance in principle, and it should be encouraged. But is it realistic for those low-income groups to insure for these eventualities, which are simply not foreseeable in many cases in the way that risks are which lead people to take out insurance, for example, for their homes and their cars? The loss of legal aid will mean most, if not all, of the 500,000 people due to be affected will lose access to advice and representation. This figure will include many of the most vulnerable categories of people. The legal aid consultation itself acknowledges that in respect of issues such as debt, welfare benefits and education, people with disabilities are likely to be disproportionately affected. 63% of legal aided clients within the sphere of welfare benefits assistance, for example, are disabled. And as the excellent briefing for this debate produced by the National Association of Citizens Advice Bureau states, alternative sources of advice are simply not available, suitable or accessible for the overwhelming majority of our client group. And the voluntary sector and pro bono does not have the capacity to fulfil the need currently met by legal aid in terms of the volume of people or the specialism required for more complex cases. I will give way, but I just wanted to, on that point, again ask the Minister if he will address either now or later whether the Department has carried out a full capacity assessment to assure us that voluntary and pro bono facilities are available to fill the gap which, which will be created by this paper.
Okay, and in the context of my honourable friend's remarks about the impact of these proposals, would she not also agree that, yet again, what we are seeing is a disproportionate impact on women, especially, of course, in relation to family cases?
I think that's absolutely right. I'm going to come on to address the issue of family law in a moment. I will.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you for giving way, and I have to say that I do believe that the legal aid budget is huge by comparison with other European countries. But I have had representations from the New Forest Citizens Advice Bureau to say that if their service gets cutbacks as well, they actually say they've 2 part-time caseworkers. And if that service gets cut back in parallel with cutbacks in legal aid, then they're wondering where their most vulnerable clients will go.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising that point. And it is going to be one of the issues I address. I think it's absolutely right that the argument, in addition to how much we fund legal aid by, and the extent to which there is, I think, a general consensus that a budget cannot go expanding indefinitely, but there are still issues about the speed and the manner in which legal aid funding is withdrawn and the impact that can have on providers. But on the issue of value for money, which I think is also at the heart of the honourable gentleman's remarks, is it not also the case that expenditure on legal aid and advice services does provide value for money because it ensures that public services and others operate effectively and well, that errors are corrected and that public law is constantly challenged. Indeed, also it helps people redress wrongs and ensure that take-up of benefits and other services is properly delivered. Again, the National Association of Citizens Advice Bureau, amongst others, convincingly argue that there is a very poor business case for what the government is now proposing. Taking so much social welfare out of scope will undermine effectively a case for value for money. It is argued that between £2 and £10 are saved for every pound that is invested in the legal aid budget. An analysis based on data from the Civil and Social Justice Survey and Legal Services Commission outcome data estimates a saving of £2 to every £1 in housing, £3 for every £1 spent on legal aid in the area of debt advice, £8.80 to £1 on legal aid in the area of benefits advice, and £7 saved for every £1 spent on employment. That is beside the benefits to the individual themselves. 80%, Mrs Reardon, of social welfare legal aid cases record positive outcomes for the clients themselves.